welcome to Coffee with Cece. This is a space for real conversations with God at the centre. And today I want to talk to you about fear. Yep, that popular, common, sometimes overwhelming emotion, fear. In our last episode, we talked about the tension between seeking clarity and trusting God. And we talked about the fact that clarity often gives us control. It gives us a sense of control. And why is that sense of control so important to us? Often, because for many of us, when we feel out of control, we start to feel afraid. So there's this quiet expectation we have that clarity removes fear. But have you ever been in a situation where you're clear about what God wants you to do and you're still afraid? And what's gone through your mind at that point? I think a lot of us assume that if we're following God, we shouldn't feel afraid. But here's the reality. Fear shows up when things aren't clear, when we're stepping into something new, when we don't feel fully equipped. And we see it's not just us, right? We see loads of examples in the Bible where people have been afraid. Moses was afraid to speak. Gideon was hiding. Esther was afraid about risking her life by coming before the king. And David wrote in his Psalms many, many times about the fear that he experienced. Fear is real. But here's the question. Have you ever had that thought and that feeling that if I was really trusting God, would I feel like this? Last year, I read a book called If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat by John Ortberg. And in there were several gems. I mean, I annotated this book within an inch of its life. But one of the sections that stood out to me most was entitled Water Walkers Accept Fear as a Price of Growth. Let me read a little excerpt for you. Here is a deep truth about water walking. The fear will never go away. Why? Because each time I want to grow, it would involve going into new territory, taking on new challenges. And each time I do that, I will experience fear again. As Susan Jeffers writes, the fear will never go away as long as I continue to grow. Wow. Fear never going away. Fear being part of our growth. As Christians, don't we want to grow? Fear is not always a sign to stop. It's often a sign that we're being stretched and that we're being asked to trust. But what about all those scriptures that tell us do not be afraid, do not fear? Someone said that there are 366 verses in the Bible that tell us not to be afraid. Enough for one day, every day of the year, including a leap year. So is this a contradiction? Can we really say that fear is part of a walk when God's telling us not to be afraid? Well, to clear this up, let me first of all start by distinguishing the difference between fear as an emotion and fear as a posture. Fear or feeling fear is natural. It's a human response and it's often unavoidable. When we experience the feeling of fear, it's not something that we can control. It just happens. When we sense danger or perceive danger, it is natural as a human to feel afraid. But I don't think that's what these scriptures are actually referring to. I think these scriptures are talking about us not living in fear. That's where we're being controlled by it. That's where the fear starts to affect our actions and causes us to shrink back. And it can even get us to the point where we refuse to move when God is leading. That's the type of fear that I believe God is dealing with when he tells us, do not be afraid. The second thing I want to say about those do not be afraid scriptures is that it's usually an invitation and not a rebuke. When you look carefully and closely, that phrase often comes in moments of uncertainty or calling or transition or real danger. And God is saying, don't feel this. He's saying you don't have to be ruled by this. Gideon, Esther, David, were they fearless? No, they absolutely felt the fear, but they still moved. You see, God doesn't always remove fear. Sometimes he meets us in it. And what he gives instead is presence, letting us know that he is there. It's reassurance, letting us know that it's going to be okay. And he gives us just enough for the next step. Because this is perhaps the part that we don't often want to say. That fear and trust can coexist. That you can feel afraid and still trust God. I'm going to say that again. You can feel afraid and still trust God. That's where courage actually is. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's choosing to move with God in the presence of it. So this is where perhaps some of us can feel a bit freer. What if fear isn't the problem? What if you feeling afraid is not a sign that in some way you have failed God or in some way you are on the wrong path? What would it look like if instead of us concentrating on eliminating fear, we focused on what it would mean to walk with God even when it's there? What if the question isn't, how do I get rid of fear? But the question is, will I move with God anyway? And so we come back to that concept of trust. That key aspect of our faith and our relationship with God. Do we trust him enough to keep moving even when we are afraid? So I want to remind someone today that maybe fear doesn't disqualify you. Maybe it's just part of the walk. Maybe it's part of your growth. And what are you going to do with that new piece of information? Will you dare to have the courage to keep moving? Will you dare to be obedient in spite of the fear? That's where the growth is. The growth in yourself, but the growth in your relationship with him. And that's also where the freedom is. Have you ever done something afraid and then felt that sheer joy and delight as you've overcome regardless? So fear is real. Fear is an emotion that comes up. But the real question is, what are we going to do with it? How will we respond to his presence, his reassurance, and the courage that he gives us? Maybe this is something to bring before God this week. Talk to him about the things that you're afraid of and ask him what's really going on. Are you really in the wrong place? Or is this an opportunity for growth? Is this an opportunity to lean in? Is this an opportunity to feel the fear and do it anyway? I'll see you in the next episode.